Hello there, and welcome everybody to this afternoon, this Friday virtual Space Hero LinkedIn Live. I'm happy to welcome you again Friday at 3 o'clock. It's already sort of, I hope, marked in your calendars. And we're going to tackle another very important topic concerning the virtual space. And you know that in the past weeks, we have been looking a lot into virtual training efficacy. We have been looking into virtual training design. We've been talking about liberating structure, a tremendous method or a tremendous methodology on how to include people into conversations while we're doing virtual trainings or in-presence trainings. And we also haven't had an expert here with us, Isman, who was showing us how he's using Miro, for example, on how to implement liberating structures. So a lot of super interesting topics, and we continue this way. So you know that Virtual Space Hero is a platform for virtual enthusiasts or to-bes. So if you're interested in joining our community, please go to our webpage, virtualspacehero.com, and you have the possibility to join our membership area. The Explorer membership is a free membership possibility where you can get to recordings, you can get exclusive invitations. You're invited to our spacing session, which is something very, very different. For sure, many of you have never experienced. And we also have working out loud circles. So please go online, virtualspacehero.com, and have a look. And as we said, well, also this Friday, again, we are streaming to 3 different platforms. So a big hello, because today I'm streaming again from Austria, and you see, it's very enlightening here in Austria. So unusually, we have so much sun that I was looking for the perfect spot for the live stream. As you can see, I did not really find it, but it doesn't matter. We take it as an enlightened experience, and we're streaming to our main platform, that is LinkedIn. We're streaming to YouTube, and we're also streaming to Facebook. And a big welcome to all of you. I see already people are joining on the different platforms. Fantastic. Laura is joining and saying hello. So happy to see you, Barbara. Yeah, definitely shining energy. Fantastic. So there is one topic that we sort of touched upon in the last weeks as well, and it related to learning. So we were talking about self-directed learning and how self-efficacy is important for self-directed learning processes. And we do know that in the virtual space, we do have more self-directed processes than usually in an in-presence setting. And there is something that we know about self-efficacy since the 1970s, when Albert Bandura, a psychologist, came up with the concept. We know that an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute behaviors is necessary to produce a specific performance attainment. So self-efficacy is something very important for us to be able to perform well. And the interesting thing is that self-efficacy was a super important aspect when we came into lockdown as well, because being aware and knowing that I am able to perform in the virtual space as a remote worker also predicted how well people could be doing that at the end. But today, we're not going to talk only about self-efficacy. We are going one step further, because Bandura also looked at group dynamics, and he observed that a group's confidence in its abilities is also associated with greater success. And today I have an expert who just published again a book on this topic, and she's talking with us about collective efficacy and how collective efficacy, what it has to do with achievement and equity in the virtual space. So I'm opening the virtual doors finally to Steph Hyde, who is joining in, who is connecting from Philadelphia. Hi there, Steph.
Good morning. Good morning from the US. Good afternoon to everybody else.
Hello there. How early is it for you, Steph?
Oh, it's 9 o'clock. It's really not that terribly early, except that we've had an interesting week here in the United States. Some of you might have heard that we have an election going on. So we've been a bit busy.
we can understand that it must be sleepless, for some more, for some less, but for whatever reason it is sleepless, but it can be sleepless for many of you, probably.
Sleepless for everybody, no matter which side you're on. I think this is definitely a nail biter, as we call it in the United States. So we'll hope to see what news we get today. But I'm happy to be here. This is a wonderful topic to talk about, particularly given the times that we're in.
Absolutely, you're so right. And you know, I'm just thinking, because you were saying it's sort of a decent time, 9 o'clock in the morning. I remember last time I also had a guest on my show from the US, and it was my fault not figuring out really where she was connecting from. And it was 6 o'clock for her, or seven, maybe it was 7 for her in the morning, and it was like really early.
Well, but the beauty of virtual work is that we really can ignore time zones, right? I mean, it's important that we are able to come together no matter what. And so we're getting up early, we're staying up late. It doesn't matter. We're really making sure we're all connected. That's the most important part.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So also for you out there, we're going to talk for the next 40 minutes about collective efficacy, about the virtual space. So let us know your questions, your comments, where you agree on or where you don't agree on, and join us in our live discussion, please. Steph, let us know a little bit about your background. So how did you come, or how did you end up to some extent with collective efficacy? That is a topic we don't read up that much, maybe, but maybe we will read about it much more in the upcoming years.
Yeah, I think it's a term that kind of defies a little understanding. It's also hard to pronounce, but essentially, so that everybody knows, collective efficacy is about a group's belief and their capacity to overcome challenges. So I have kind of a roundabout story. I actually spent about 10 years in the marketing and PR world before I moved over into education. So it seems like kind of an odd transition, but it actually all makes sense in the end. I left after about a decade in that industry, and I became a classroom teacher, and then I became a school leader, and then I've done a lot of learning consultancy over the years. And I think when I look back on it, it's now a well over 30-year career. I have to say that the working with individuals and groups to build their capacity, to have a belief in their capacity, has really been at the core of everything I've done, whether it's been in the marketing world, or it's been in the classroom with kids, or it's been working with adults. It's about how do we build our capacity. And of course, the Collective Efficacy book that you referred to, which I'm excited, it's going to be out in just a couple of short weeks, focuses very much on the educational world, but I really hope folks who are watching right now understand that the idea of collective efficacy is absolutely essential for any group, any team that's working. There's been a lot of research done in the activism world, in community organization, in healthcare, in neighborhood crime prevention. There's been a lot of research in those areas as well. So we've got some really good understandings now that when we want to affect change, when we want to work with groups, whether we're developing a product or we're organizing our community, we need to focus on the idea of collective efficacy.
Oh, that's super important. So, and it also goes way beyond to how I was seeing efficacy or efficacy in general, because I see it very much from a learner's perspective, and also efficacy or self-efficacy is so important to achieve your learning goals. But as you're putting it in the context of change and change management, I believe it becomes so important, as you were saying, considering the sort of the environment of constant change we're in now, right?
Yep, absolutely. When we think about how complex our times have become, how complex the world has become, I think it's Ron Heifetz did the research where he described the difference between technical challenges, where we can look to the past to figure out how to solve those problems, versus adaptive challenges, those that don't have any kind of past precedent for us to work through. And he identified that one of the biggest problems we have is that we try to apply a technical fix to an adaptive challenge, right? So we misread, or we underestimate the complexity of what we're facing. And so we kind of just sort of say, we pull in the people who've done this work before, and we say, go ahead, have at it. And then we end up with frustration, right? We end up with bigger challenges. We sometimes even make things worse, right? I know you called me an expert. I try not to use that word at all, because I think when it comes to technical challenges, experts are exactly what we need. Those are the people that have had those experiences in the past. They know how to solve those problems. But when we face complexity, it requires us to have a little bit of humility and know that we don't have all of the answers. But you know who has the answers? It's the team. It's the group. And so how do we harness the wisdom of that group, and how do we build their collective capacity to address those challenges? And that's the way forward. So when folks are facing challenges, it's important to really assess how big it is, how complex it is, and then to find those right people to pull together, whether you're in person or virtually. And of course, the challenge is, how do you do it virtually? Because we face different kinds of constraints when we're in the virtual space.
Absolutely. And to all of you out there, so I see the 3 channels, there are already a lot of people. Sometimes you are going to be more active in the chat, sometimes less. But one thing you should not miss out is connect with Steph on LinkedIn and follow her updates, and also have a look at her webpage. Tigris Solutions is her company, and also stay updated, because on the 17th of November, right, Steph, you're going to hold the physical copy of your book. So pre-order is possible already, and we're going to share with you the link also.
Thank you.
Fantastic. That is so important what you're saying. So probably also, if we and the way you're applying it to the learning context, clearly, and I love the quote that Joshua Davis brought to me to some extent: the one who is doing the talking is the one who is doing the learning, meaning that we as trainers, we as facilitators, clearly need to do less talking and rely more on the group. That was also sort of an outcome of the fantastic conversation we had with Cassie Laborie about interactive and engaging online trainings.
Yeah.
So if we think about your classroom, your facilitating experience, Steph, if we talk about groups efficacy, what needs to be considered when we are going to into a virtual setting?
So this is one of my favorite topics, and let me take a little bit of a step back. And so I'll share that when I was in the advertising industry, I happened to be there during the transition from kind of old school, shall we say, drawing board type work over to technological solutions in that industry. And of course, when we first got our computers, what did we do? We replicated the things we did before. We copied the things we did before. We didn't really use the power of the technology, right? So interestingly, I'm seeing that now as we think about how do we shift our learning into virtual spaces, right? We kind of cling to sort of those old practices that we had before, and we don't think about how we can harness the power of the technology. So for me, one of the most important things to think about is not how do we do what we did before, but how do we actually translate it or transition it, transform it, so that we actually use the power of the virtual space. So a couple of examples of that is how do we harness the tools that are within the platforms. Unfortunately, they're getting much more robust, as you know, out of necessity right now, to make sure that our sessions are much more interactive, not just webinars where we're hearing a person talk for 42 minutes, on a topic, but how do we actually engage the groups so that they can really do some interactive work while we're together. So I try to be very platform agnostic. I use whatever platforms my clients are comfortable with. But I have to say, I do have a preference for platforms that allow for breakout spaces. Because I find that when I think about what I would have done in person to be super interactive and engage the group so that we're starting to build that collective capacity, I want to be able to do that online as well. So breakout spaces where people get a chance to talk to each other, and then also some digital tools that I can use in conjunction with those spaces. I like to recommend free tools, so I use Google Jamboard a lot because that's like an interactive whiteboard. So my teams can be in small group conversations and have a digital space where they can actually use Post-it notes just like they would have done in the physical space to brainstorm, to raise questions, to think through ideas and challenges. And then when I can bring them back into the main space, they're very energized. They're empowered. Of course, that's one of the conditions that builds efficacy is how much say do I have in this process, right? So I have to feel a bit empowered. When we're setting goals, how much involvement does the team have in setting those goals together? And then how much do we actually take a little time and say, hey, what did we all learn today? What did we learn together as a team? And we don't do that enough, quite frankly. We didn't do it in person, and so we're not doing it virtually. So I think we have to do two things. And one is kind of rethink those past practices, but also think about what do we have the ability to do now in these virtual spaces that we might not have done before. I am so excited because I'm a practitioner of the art of hosting conversations tradition. And so I conduct many world cafes and open spaces and circle practices online because those are super interactive and they involve people. And we used to be very bound by geography. If I was going to do a world cafe, it was only with people within a particular region. Well, now that is absolutely not the case. I can do, in the US, I can have a world cafe where people from all over the country or even outside the country are participating. Open space where we get a chance to explore ideas globally. I've been participating and actually facilitating a few of those where we've got folks from all over the world. So as long as we just keep those time zones in our heads a little bit straight, we really can do this. And so one of the core beliefs in the art of hosting tradition is that there's much more power when we have a diversity of perspectives and experiences in the group. Well, how much more diverse can you get when you get people from all over the world? So it opens up tremendous possibilities. So I would encourage people to really use their imagination, right? Don't see the virtual as a constraint, see it as an enabler of having these really super interactive experiences.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm just picking up on something that you were saying, conversion versus transformation, or transformation versus conversion. I think all of us, and that was also sort of one of the outcomes of my previous shows, is we really need to get beyond converting just what we had in an in-presence setting, because it not necessarily works in a virtual space. So it's all about transforming our concepts. And we have been looking at platforms, for example, like Toasty. I had Kevon with me already a few months ago here on the show, and we were talking about how Toasty is trying to overcome and to be more inclusive and more equitable with the tools or with the features they are integrating into their tool. Anyways, there are many tools, but as you said, we all need to adapt to what our clients want to use or are able to use because of some IT security restrictions, whatever it is. We were mentioning at the beginning and also in our pre-conversations that collective efficacy is so important in the virtual space. Why is that?
Well, collective efficacy sounds kind of deceptively simple, right? We just say, well, it's a group's belief in their ability to overcome challenges, which sounds, okay, well, that doesn't sound like it's so hard. And the reality is when you dig in, it's actually really tough, right? Because you're talking about belief and perception. And we all know that that's actually really hard to galvanize in a group. How do we get a group to believe in their collective ability? And so when we're in the virtual space, I think we run into a lot of the typical issues of, when a group comes together, we're easily distracted, right? We're on a digital platform where, I'll be honest with you, my email's open right behind this window. It's very easy to be distracted. We've got texting. We've got, I'm in my home where other things could be happening. So there's distractions. There's also a lack of ability in being able to read body language. We can see our faces on the camera, but when we're in a group setting, as a facilitator, I typically really watch for body language. When are people sort of losing energy? So I modify the activities that we're doing. If I sense that there's some growing tension, what kinds of questions am I going to ask that'll guide us through those tense moments? And that is frankly much harder in the virtual space. It really is. So again, how do we think about translating, our good understandings about how groups learn into this new space and being aware of what other ways we can do that. So I have found that one of the practices I've always done in person is I have a check-in at the beginning of our session and I have a check-out at the end of the session, right? So move us cognitively into the work we're about to do, and when the work is finished, how do we close it out, be reflective, and kind of take the work forward. Well, in the virtual space, I'm finding I need to do mini check-ins along the way during a session, right? If I send people to a breakout, we don't just come to the back from the breakout and plunge into the next activity. We need to do a check-in, and find out, how did that go? Where are people's energy levels? Where are they, how are they feeling now? What kind of learning has just occurred? And then move that into the next thing that we do. And so that the notion of what we're trying to do, which is to build that collective belief and capacity, has to always be what's running through my mind as a facilitator, and then I design accordingly, right? So you always have to design for the group, knowing what they need, knowing where they are. How do you gauge that in the virtual space, right? So we've got to use some of those kinds of different techniques that we might not have used in the past. I'll tell you, when we get back to physical space, those mini check-ins are things I'm going to carry back with me, because I have found that that's actually really helpful. It kind of keeps us aware of the learning as we're going on, the sort of mid-course corrections through a session together, which means that we end up with a more powerful result in the end.
I think that's a tremendously important aspect that you're saying. That probably I'm also, as many of us, we are planning way too much very often content into our sessions, so that we sort of forget these small check-ins. Frankly speaking, I usually do it also only at the beginning and at the end. And I think it's something really worth thinking about, whether I'm integrating it in between. Could you give us an example of something, of a fast check-in? How do you do that? Is it just asking, what is your learning, or what kind of activity do you maybe have for me and for our participants, viewers here, to share with?
So the favorite thing I like to say, which everybody hates, is, of course, it depends, right? It depends. Are you working with a small group? Are you working with a big group?
Yeah.
So if it's a small group, I really like to hear from the groups. I almost run it like a quick circle check-in. I ask them to give me a phrase or a sentence of, what was the most important thing that resonated with you from the conversation. If the group is a little bit larger, we can use the chat feature for them to enter it into the chat. I will do some other things too. So I'm a big fan of using survey links. So I can ask a question and drop a link into the chat window and say, before we resume, I'd like everyone to take 2 minutes for a quick little response. And I'll ask a question in the survey link, and then I can even, if it's a sort of a multiple choice type question, I can even share the results with the group. So it could be something like, one of the things I've adopted recently is I do a weather check. How's your personal weather forecast right now? Is it stormy, or is it just a little bit rainy, or is the sun starting to come out, or are you bright and sunny? A quick little weather check, and you can kind of gauge where, particularly with a large group, where's the sort of the feeling? Am I feeling a little uncomfortable, or I'm actually ready to keep moving ahead? And you can do that with polls. You can do it with a survey link. You can have them enter it into the chat. Those are kind of fun ways to do it. I've also done, as long as everyone's cameras are on, write three important words that capture the learning from the last conversation, or what you're anticipating for the next conversation. Write it big on a piece of paper and hold it up to your camera, and you get an instant visual of kind of where everybody is. And of course, there's online word cloud generators that you can do almost the same thing digitally, but you sort of want to think about sort of the tech level of your group, how many people there are, can everybody see each other at the same time, and then you pick the check-in accordingly. So those are just a couple of little ideas that I use, in the middle of my sessions.
Fantastic. And it just reminds me, I wrote a blog article about how to use props in the virtual space, because I also had the feeling that particularly in the first semester or the first half year of this year, all of us were moving online, and we were forgetting about what we can use, sort of objects that are around us that we can connect to learning. And probably it's also nice, because I think we talked about that with Joshua, I believe, that you can always ask participants, to grab, if you have more time than the 2 minutes, if it's a small group, to grab an object around you, and think about why that object or how that object relates to your learning. And that's really also a fun way of participants get moving, right? They stand up, they need to move, they need to grab something, they need to be creative, innovative. And maybe you could even then afterwards, we thought about that, doing like a 2-person or 3-person breakout room where they guess why the other person has chosen that sort of object or not.
Yeah, those are great fun, and I will tell you that I'm a big fan of using circle practice. And typically in a circle practice, we have talking pieces. So whoever's holding the talking piece has the floor, and everyone else listens, and they will actually, put the talking piece down as a signal that they finished speaking, and then someone else can pick it back up. Well, of course, in a virtual space, how do you do that? So with a little bit of coaching, we let people know that sort of when they're ready to speak, they'll actually say, I'm picking up the talking piece now. And what I've asked everyone to do is to pre-select an object. And as a check-in, I'll have them hold up the object and explain why that's an important object to them and why they've chosen it as a talking piece. So we get back to that idea of collective efficacy, that social cohesion, that knowledge of each other is really an important part. And so if we have that opportunity to share, it helps to build that collective efficacy. And now I have more awareness of the other people that I'm working with. I know more about my team. And then we just help people understand that when they're finished speaking, they say, and now I'm putting the talking piece back, and they put it down, and that means the floor is open for someone else. So without the visual cue of the physical space, we can still use that thinking. And in a way, it's almost more personal because everyone chooses their own object. And so it has meaning for them, and they share a little bit about why that's important. And that helps to build that cohesion that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Super lovely practice and idea. And also, I'm a fan of that as well because, as I said, we get moving. The moment we move a little bit, we interrupt, we get our blood circulates more, of course, and it's also sort of a change within a program, and that's also very good. Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing these small but very efficient and effective ideas.
Efficacious, it's one of the difficult words to pronounce. But yeah, we want to be more efficacious individually, but then we want to be efficacious as a group as well. So that's the key.
Fantastic. When we were discussing group efficacy before, we were also talking about equity and achievement in virtual settings. So where is the relationship between collective efficacy, equity, and achievement?
So this is something that we've studied quite heavily in the education sphere because, of course, equity is a huge issue, particularly in the United States, in terms of our educational system. And when I was co-authoring the book with Jenny Donahue, we were really focusing on achievement. What we saw was that there was a direct relationship between the collective efficacy of a school or a district or even a team within a school and their students' achievement. And we noticed that it also closed those gaps that typically exist based on race and income and gender and other demographics that you might want to study. And we're trying to call those now more opportunity gaps than achievement gaps because we don't want to place sort of the equity issue. We don't want to place the blame on the individuals. We want to talk about the fact that there's a lack of opportunity. So we found that collective efficacy is a way to decrease those opportunity gaps, that a team that has more efficacy can provide those opportunities for their students. So we want to think about this not just in the education world. Of course, this pandemic highlighted incredible inequities in our society because of a lack of access to the technology that people now need. It's absolutely essential in order to be connected to the world and to be a participant in what's happening. And so I'll share with you that outside of education, I'm also working right now with one of our states in the US, a Department of Health, and we're doing some community organizing around health issues. And one of the big problems we're running into, again, is an equity issue in that we have people who want to participate in conversations who don't have computers. They don't have Wi-Fi. So how do we make sure their voices are heard, and how do we involve them in community conversations? So it's great when you put a strong group of people in a room and you get them to brainstorm ideas. You know what? Great things happen. So we're coming up with all sorts of things that I've been seeing going on in places where these inequities exist, like putting Wi-Fi hotspots in a truck and driving it to the parking lot of a space where people don't have access. And so all of a sudden we can create that Wi-Fi access so people can participate in an online conversation. We make sure that we have phone join-in capacity. So if you can't join in with your computer, you can call in and we can make sure your voices are heard. And we're trying to partner people up so that the person on the phone doesn't feel left out or removed, that they can have a voice in the conversation. We're trying to partner with organizations to increase access to technology. Of course, we have to do it safely these days with the pandemic, but making sure that there are places in our communities where folks have access. So you can see that there's sort of this correlation between the communities willing to come together and think through these challenges and then provide those solutions that are going to build the equity that we're looking for. And of course, we know that when that happens, we raise the voices or we raise the capacity of everybody. We end up getting more diversity of thinking, better ideas, and we pull communities together and they are more successful. We've got decades of research now to support it, but I think we also now have the sense of urgency and the ideas to make it happen.
I love the example of the truck, honestly, and it really shows how creativity or how our creative approaches or solutions can have a tremendous impact in how communities can come together or can participate in a dialogue. I love that example, Steph. Thanks a lot for sharing. And it reminds me a lot about the conversation that I had with Melanie Martinelli, and she was describing a learning project that she had for Pakistan. And it was an NGO there, and they were facing serious troubles because the bandwidth was not good enough, and the environment wasn't stable enough to really use a live session as we do it here in a streaming platform or in Zoom with the breakout rooms. And so they also had to be super creative to see how can we connect that still the participants so that they have this aspect of social learning, that it is also so important, the peer learning and social learning aspect to grow as a group then together. And they were, for example, just simply using WhatsApp groups, WhatsApp discussion groups. Of course, from a facilitator's perspective, it is more challenging, probably more frustrating, and a lot more work. And we do know that, but still they were able to manage to put the whole virtual learning journey for the Pakistani NGO they were working for into a context so they could go on with the program.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you said there is that it is harder for the facilitator. And I think that those of us who do these facilitations have to remember that that's not the point, right? It's not the point to be easier for the facilitator. The point is to make it more engaging for our participants and to make sure their voices are heard. So whatever we have to do, whether we have to monitor, 4 different scrolling chat streams at the same time, whatever it is that we have to do, that's really what's most important. And I think as a facilitator, the other thing we have to kind of remember is to just be a little bit humble. There's always going to be a technological glitch. There's always going to be a problem. How many of us have forgotten to drop a link into the chat before our groups went to the breakout sessions, and then we have to scramble to go to each session to make sure they have the link that they need, or what might happen. We have our groups and everyone works perfectly, but there's that one person who can't stay connected, and how do we help them through it? We have all of those kind of difficult moments, but I think if we all understand that we're working in this together, we smile through it, we breathe through it, and we come up with solutions, and we just get better and better at what we're doing. And that brings us back to that idea of efficacy. So when we have those successful experiences, it actually increases our sense of efficacy in ourselves. But also when teams have those successful experiences, right? When they come together and they solve those problems together, that increases their collective efficacy and it increases their success.
Oh, that's really, yeah, absolutely super important. Fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing. And that's really great examples. Let's think a little bit about the organizational context. So we were talking a lot about communities, about the virtual classroom. What about virtual events or the virtual space in our organizations, and what is your sort of takeaway, or what are your projects about when you work with organizations, when you work with managers or leaders? And at this point also, so let's just drop a note, also an official one for all of you out there. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts on this, just let us know in the chat feature, and we're happy to discuss it and put it up here. So let us know your thoughts and your questions. Steph, so what about the organizational context?
Yeah, so this is a big one, and I'm very fortunate right now to be working with a few different leadership teams, and so I'm trying to think of sort of one story that kind of speaks to the biggest learning right now. I have one group that I've been working with, and they were struggling a little bit. They said there were a few comments of, and we've all heard it, death by Zoom. You know, that just sort of the endless meetings, and so I actually took a little time to speak individually with some of the leadership team. And it finally emerged, what finally emerged from those conversations, a couple of people said, you know what I miss? I just miss those sort of casual moments when I would drop by somebody's office, you know, the unplanned, we'd kind of bump into each other in the hallway, we'd have a conversation, and all of a sudden we'd find that we'd have this great idea for a project, or we'd connect on something we didn't know about. And we don't have those now because we're not in our office spaces where, you know, everything is very scheduled, it's very formatted. And so we don't have that sort of casual aspect to the work. So one of the things I'm doing with leadership teams is thinking about, well, how can we actually create that sort of drop-in piece or that casual piece in the virtual space? So how do we sort of end the more formal approach to our meeting sessions? Or how do we flip those so that the information that we're sharing that could have been shared in an email, we're being very strategic about doing that ahead of time so that when we come together, we're focusing more on the interaction piece of it. How do we have those times together to catch each other up? What's going on with us personally? What are the challenges we're facing? Which we typically don't do in a formal meeting setting. And we're talking about things like having a virtual water cooler or virtual coffee table spots, so that if I have a moment in my day where I just want to see who's available for a quick chat, I have a place that I can go. So it's not quite as open-ended as it might be in the office space, but it's more open-ended than these very rigidly scheduled meetings that we typically have been falling into, that pattern we've been falling into. So we can be creative about that. You know, people have in their calendar, they have sort of open office hours where somebody could, where they can't physically just pop into the office and sit in a chair, but they could virtually pop into the office and say, hey, what's going on with you? What's happening? Nothing predetermined, no agenda, no schedule ahead of time, but having those meaningful conversations, which is what helps build those cohesive teams that we really need to be successful. So it's how do we use our imaginations? Let's think about how we did things before. And if there's something about that we miss, what can we do in the virtual space to push that forward and to bring that forward? And can we use the virtual space to make it even better, right? And so the idea of flipping the meetings, right? Never, ever should we have a meeting that could have been accomplished with an email, right? The meeting should be about us interacting with each other. So it's being thoughtful about those designs, and those conversations I'm having with leaders are actually really fun because we can get super creative. We can try some things, they might not work, but that's okay. We'll try something else. And it's starting to have some momentum in the groups that I'm working with.
Mm-hmm. I think these are super powerful examples that you're providing us here, because I also think that one of the biggest challenges was now, and probably that's also maybe have destroyed a little bit a group's efficacy. Now I'm there. I was the whole time, it's efficacy, not efficacy, it's efficacy. And you know what happens the moment that you start looking at something, it is this and not that. Of course, what you say, it's like the not that, right? Anyway. I think to some extent our practices, because we were not able to transform properly into the virtual space, might even have destroyed some groups' efficacy at the beginning. And we need to work on that again to build it up, because clearly a group's efficacy might have been very big or very good in a normal in-presence setting, but it might have suffered in that transition, or if there was no transformation, it was just a conversion to the virtual space. So the examples of having a virtual water cooler or a virtual coffee in the morning, where just everybody deliberately can connect for 15 minutes and I open up at whatever room it is, just to chat, to chit chat, and to create that space is very important. Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I'd also love to know, what can leaders do to support individuals? Because clearly, even though we're talking about groups efficacy, if the individual doesn't have or doesn't work on his her own self-efficacy, I assume that also groups efficacy is sort of influenced.
Yes, yeah, you're talking about the individual efficacy being low also diminishes the group's efficacy, right? Because we've got that sort of, that difficult, there is that correlation, right? It's sort of an inverse relationship, right? When efficacy goes up individually, so does the group's efficacy. And then of course the same goes true. So I think leaders need to be really aware of where their individual folks are. And I think people are adapting to the new environments in different ways. Some are thriving and some are really struggling with it. And so regular check-ins are very important. One manager that I've been working with, one of the most important shifts he made was fewer large group meetings so that he would have time for individual check-ins with his folks, right? And that those individual check-ins were really based on him doing more listening than talking, right? So it's letting people kind of talk through, what are my experiences, where are my successes, and where are my frustrations, and kind of working through those together. And I think it's really important that we make sure that our leaders know that they, number one, need to do a lot of listening, but number two, they need to help people understand where they've been successful. We so often focus on where we find fault with what we've done, right? I should have done that better. I should have done that better. And we don't take the time to really be very intentional about what worked. So if I just ran a meeting, or I just facilitated a project, or whatever it was that I had to do, what about it worked well? Really make note of that, because that's going to now build my self-efficacy. And here's a really important part: make sure I share that with my colleagues, because that vicarious experience for them helps to build our collective efficacy. So those are actually really important pieces of the work that we often don't take time. We feel like, oh, that's fluffy, that's to make everybody feel good. Absolutely not. There's a tremendous amount of research that's essential to individual success and then team success. So we, as leaders, we really need to make sure we're carving out the time for that. I would say that's probably a leader's most important job.
That's super great. And I do see how much it connects with so many things that I've been doing for years, like strength orientation, for example, or positive leadership, clearly self-efficacy. I do that in my strength orientations, leadership workshops, but also positive leadership clearly is very much related to groups efficacy as well as self-efficacy at the end. And look, there's stuff we're just seeing. Muhammad is joining from Karachi, Pakistan. Thanks so much, Muhammad, for joining us, and thanks for your nice words. Last but not least, there is just one small announcement. If for someone who's interested, I'm running a digital leadership series for Vienna Global Leaders, a platform that I'm strongly collaborating with, that was built up 2 years ago, and it's about digital leadership, how to lead remote but hybrid teams as well. And one of the workshops that we are running there is about working methods, because clearly the moment that I know what kind of methods can I use to work productively as a remote worker or to lead productively, this also increases my self-efficacy and at the end the group's efficacy, to come back to what Steph was saying. Fantastic. And not to forget, don't miss to connect with Stephanie and also go on her webpage. Her book is ready for pre-order. We're going to share the link also later on, so you can directly going there. And we see also Muhammad is saying checking for listening is a good approach. Just checking time in and time out. Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Muhammad, for sharing with us. And with that stuff, we're almost at the end. I'd love to have you share one last insight, so sort of round, round out? No.
to round us out or to close us out. So yeah, I'm trying to think, how do you sum up such a big topic? But I think the most important thing I'd love to encourage people to do is to use some imagination, right? I think that's one of the biggest issues we have when we start talking about. I love, Barbara, when you put up the conversion versus transformation, right? Like, how do we actually transform the practices? We have to be a bit imaginative. And the most important part of being imaginative is don't do it alone. You want to do it with a team, right? So the power of the team is absolutely essential. So how do you harvest or gather the wisdom of that group? By pulling them together, by creating the structures that allow them to be super interactive with each other, building up their confidence, and then listening to them, really listening to them and giving them a voice. I'd encourage everyone to try that out. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Obviously, this is my favorite topic, and I'm very happy to have talked about it this morning.
Thanks so much, Steph. That's really fantastic. And at this point also, I want to give a shout out to my Global Case Study Challenge team, because I'm running that big COIL project, Cooperative Online International Learning Project, with 600 students from across the globe. And we studied that with one colleague in Austria together. So we were more or less 2. And now we grew into a management team of 4 female researchers. And it is amazing how our ideas, our outcome, our implementation, the whole thing grew and evolved in a way that I could have never imagined. And to be fair, I love to work alone, so I don't necessarily need to be in a team, but there are teams that I just love. And at this point, a big shout out to the Global Case Study Challenge team. Thanks so much. We have such a great project there. And it's also seeing the groups working together. We have 100 students groups, you must imagine, from India to Chile, in working together in global virtual teams. And also there are all these processes that we were talking about. And the aspect of groups efficacy is something that we were trying to tackle or to sort of foster within the project as well. Steph, it was tremendous having you here. Thank you so much. I'm wishing you a beautiful Friday. And backstage we have a sort of a virtual cocktail prepared. I'm joining you immediately, but at this point, a big thank you again and applause for the tremendous work you're doing. And I'm very much looking forward to reading your book. I'm also going to post into the comment section the link later on. I see you in a bit, okay?
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steph. Well, it was a tremendous conversation. I'm really happy that you joined us. Thank you so much, and don't miss the next session. So you know that on the webpage, virtualspacehero.com, if you go there, you find already all the guests for this year's shows, and I already have a lineup until March 2021, which is tremendous. I'm really happy. Next week, just to give you a short outlook, next week I'm talking to Paul Campillo. Paul Campillo is a manager at Typeform, and Typeform is a very innovative company from Spain. And we're going to talk about how Typeform is inspiring brands to have meaningful conversations at scale. And if you go to my webpage, you will also see one feature of Typeform that is fantastic. It is Video Ask, where you see myself talking in a small circle on the webpage to whoever is visiting us on in the web. So having said that, I thank you very, very much for being with us. See you next Friday at 3. And I'm really happy if you forward the postings, if you let other people know what we're doing here, and join our community on the blog. If you don't have the time to follow a whole conversation, you know that on my blog we are publishing a short summary with the most important point of each LinkedIn Live about 2 weeks after the live session. So let's become a hero of the virtual space. Thank you very much for joining. Bye. Have a beautiful weekend.